When we think of Thor, we almost always picture a superhero. Noble, blonde, from another planet. But what if I told you that behind that pop culture icon hides a figure that's, well, much more complex, violent, and honestly, fascinating? Today, we're going to do exactly that. We're going to dismantle the myth to find the true god of thunder. Just look at this contrast. It's incredible. On one hand, there's the movie hero who fights for universal justice. But on the other, well, there we find the god from the Norse sagas, a red-headed warrior with, let's say, an explosive temper and a legendary appetite and thirst. The difference is it really? Abysmal. And it tells us a lot about the culture that saw him as a god. Let's talk about the image we all know. Then, yes, we'll dive fully into his true essence and his incredible arsenal. After that, we'll explore his most famous adventures. And finally, we'll understand why this god, so particular, was the perfect hero for the Vikings. All right, let's start with what's familiar, the version most of us have in mind. That's, of course, the pop culture icon, the image that's defined Thor for recent generations and undoubtedly turned him into a global star. We're talking about the Thor from the comics and movies, of course, a prince of Asgard who's almost always virtuous, right? His main concern is protecting all of the realms. He's a classic heroic figure, perfectly polished for a modern audience. Good. Do we have that image clear? Perfect. Now let's forget all that. Now let's really travel back to the past to meet the original figure, because this is a god who, let's say, wasn't born in a Hollywood writer's room, right? He was forged by the imagination and above all by the needs of the peoples of the cold northern lands of Europe. The mythological Thor was, in essence, the pure embodiment of fury. In fact, it was believed that his red hair and beard were a direct reflection of his fiery temper. This wasn't a calculating strategist, not at all. He was an unstoppable force of nature, solving his problems with violence, capable of devouring entire oxen in one sitting and drinking mead, well, without measure. And here comes one of the greatest ironies in all of Norse mythology. Think about it. Thor was known as the greatest giant killer. They were his sworn enemies. However, his mother was a giantess, and his father, the great Odin, was half giant. What does this mean? Well, that the greatest enemy of the giants was genetically 3/4 giant himself. Incredible. And pay attention, because here's a key fact that really changes everything. We often think Viking was a people, a nationality, but no, it was a profession. The word literally meant going on expedition, raiding, or plundering. And for such a dangerous and violent job, who was the ideal god? Thor, of course. Not Odin, the wise and reflective one, but Thor, the one with direct action and brute force. But of course, Thor's strength didn't just come from his muscles. Much of his power lay in a divine arsenal, a set of magical tools that made him, well, practically unstoppable. And no, we're not just talking about the famous hammer. Let's see. To start, his means of transportation was a chariot pulled by 2 magical goats. But here is the incredible part. He could kill and eat them for dinner, and the next day, as long as their bones were intact, he resurrected them. On top of that, he had iron gauntlets to control Mjolnir and a belt that, when tightened, doubled his already enormous strength. And of course, we come to the hammer, Mjolnir. But its origin, it's anything but honorable, anything but glorious. In fact, the whole story of its creation is due to a prank, a very heavy prank by his stepbrother, the unequaled trickster Loki. It started like this. Loki, in a fit of pure malice, cuts off the beautiful golden hair of Sif, Thor's wife. Imagine Thor's fury. To save himself, Loki promises to get her a new golden head of hair made by the best dwarves. But, being Loki, he can't help complicating everything, and he bets his own head that other dwarves couldn't forge even better treasures. To make sure he wins, what does he do? He turns into a fly and starts buzzing the blacksmith dwarf right when he's forging the hammer, right? That distraction made the handle, well, abnormally short. And so, from a prank and a deception, Mjolnir was born. All right, now let's explore a couple of his most famous adventures. And we have to say it up front, these are rarely the typical good versus evil stories. They're chaotic tales, often comic, that reveal both his incredible power and his surprising limitations. One of the most known stories is his trip to the fortress of a giant king named Utgard Loki. This king, very cunning, subjects him to a series of tests, seemingly humiliating ones, to show him that maybe he wasn't as powerful as he thought. And Thor failed every single test. But of course, it was all a big deception. It turns out the tests were literally impossible. The horn he tried to drink from was connected to the ocean itself. The cat he tried to lift was actually Jorgundang, the serpent that encurls the world. And the old woman he fought was old age personified. So, although he technically lost, the mere fact that he almost succeeded demonstrated a power so terrifying that the giants were paralyzed with fear. But not all his adventures were about brute force. Far from it. One story in particular shows a completely different side. What happens when a god so powerful wakes up one morning and discovers that his most prized weapon, Mjolnir, has simply disappeared? Well, it turns out a giant named Thrym had stolen the hammer, and his price for returning it was to marry the goddess Freya. Obviously, Freya refused outright. Thor was furious, desperate, out of options. Until Loki, as always, had an idea, a plan, a completely humiliating plan. The plan was as simple as it absurd. If the giant wanted a bride, well, they'd give him a bride. That's right, the god of thunder himself, the epitome of warrior masculinity, would have to dress up as Freya to recover his hammer. Despite the humiliation, the goal was the only thing that mattered. So there goes Thor, dressed as a bride, with Loki disguised as his bridesmaid, to the wedding banquet. At the key moment, the giant, to seal the marriage, places Mjolnir in the lap of his supposed bride. Big mistake. Thor grabs it with force, rips off the veil, and unleashes all his fury, massacring every giant in the hall. Mission accomplished. So, after all this, what are we left with? All these stories lead us to the final, most important question. Why? Why was this god so violent, so gluttonous, so impulsive, the undisputed favorite of the Vikings? Let's think about Viking culture, a culture that lived on audacity, strength, and survival in an incredibly hostile world. A philosopher god, abstract, had limited use. They needed a protector, a champion who understood their struggles and acted decisively. And that god was Thor. And here is the real key to it all. Thor's immense popularity didn't come from his perfection, but precisely from his imperfection. His wrath, his insatiable appetite, his impulsivity were deeply human traits, just taken to a divine scale. He was a god they could identify with, a god who understood their struggles and moreover had the power of thunder to defend them. The Thor of the myths may seem brutal compared to the modern superhero, but the truth is both are a reflection of their time. The Ancient One was an imperfect protector for a dangerous world. The New One, an idealist for an era that seeks virtuous heroes. In the end, Thor's evolution leaves us with a question hanging in the air. What do the stories we tell about our greatest heroes really reveal about us?